Six healthy young men walk into a London hospital, volunteering for what they believed was a routine clinical trial. Within hours, they are unrecognisable, writhing in agony, organs failing, and their faces grotesquely swollen. One would later be described as looking like the Elephant Man. But this wasn't an underground operation. It happened in a modern medical facility under official oversight, and it went catastrophically wrong. Welcome to one of the darkest chapters in medical trial history. This is the story of the Northwick Park disaster. Northwick Park Hospital in northwest London hosts a private clinical trials unit run by the firm Parexel. The drug on trial is TGN 1412. An experimental immune-modulating antibody developed by German biotech company Tegenero. Its mission is bold: to supercharge a specific set of immune cells to fight diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and leukemia. It had cleared the laboratory phase, and as far as regulators were concerned, it was ready for humans. But that assumption would soon collapse. Before a drug ever touches a human bloodstream, it must go through a long and regulated preclinical journey. It starts in the lab, where scientists test thousands of molecules against cell cultures to find those that show promise. Those compounds are refined and tested further for stability, strength, and target precision. Then comes animal testing, in vivo trials, usually on rodents and at least one other species like dogs or monkeys. Researchers monitor toxicity, metabolism, organ damage, and dosing limits. Now, these tests follow strict guidelines called good laboratory practice. Now, once a drug shows promise and safety in animals, all the data is bundled into a submission to regulatory bodies like the FDA in the United States or the MHRA in the United Kingdom. Only after reviewing all safety data and proposed human protocols do these authorities grant approval for Phase 1 human trials. TGN 1412 had passed that gauntlet. Animal studies showed no major red flags. Parexel recruited volunteers. 6 healthy men, aged 19 to 34, each of which was to be paid £2,000. 2 further men would also receive the payment but would receive placebos. On the morning of March the 13th, the men arrived, calm and casual. They were told side effects might include a headache or maybe a mild fever. What followed was something out of a medical horror story. They were split into 2 groups of 4, with one in each receiving a placebo, although no one, including the clinicians, knew who. The atmosphere was relaxed and light-hearted as Rob Oldfield, then 31, and recently returned from an acting course in LA, recalls. A friend of mine had done trials and he said I should sign up. They were offering £2,000 and I thought that was okay, he says. I was interested in the scientific contribution I could be making. It was a medicine being tested in a laboratory approved by the government. What could go wrong? Another patient, Raste Khan, said the payment made the trials a no-brainer for him. At 8 a.m, patient 001, David Oakley, was the first to receive the drug. Newly engaged to fiancée Katrina, he was in the midst of planning their wedding when he signed up. I had lots to look forward to, he recalls. The remaining participants were dosed at 10-minute intervals in accordance with the approved protocol. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A few casual laughs, a bit of small talk. But 45 minutes later, all 6 had received the full dose. Within minutes, things began to go wrong. The first man, David, complained of a severe headache unlike one he'd ever had before. The nurse arranged a cold compress on his forehead, but withheld painkillers, careful not to interfere with the drug's observed effects. He then started to experience excruciating back pain. I had severe pain in my lower back. It was way worse than the migraine, David recalls. I was trying my hardest to twist and turn to find a position where I could feel less pain. I couldn't understand. It was horrible. Raste, meanwhile, could only look on in horror at David's plight. Unaware that he had been given the placebo, he believed he was shortly to undergo the same horror. I was assuming that my body was maybe a bit slower and it was going to kick in shortly. It was daunting and extremely scary, he says. As subject number 7, Rob received the drug almost an hour later than David, who by then was already experiencing his adverse reactions, and recalls feeling almost immediately as though he had been dipped into ice. My whole body went freezing cold and I started shaking, he says. This wasn't something you could stop. It was so extreme. It was horrendous. Events accelerated. 4 hours into the trial, the patients were screaming in agony, while the bewildered clinical team descended into panic. It was all manic. Everything was happening all at once, Raste says. They were vomiting, they were screaming in pain, people were fainting, they couldn't control their bowels. It was like a horror movie. As the patients' conditions worsened and panic set in, clinical staff were overwhelmed. Daniel Bradford, the doctor overseeing the trial, ran down 2 flights of stairs into the hospital's intensive care unit to grab the first 2 doctors he could see. In a recent newspaper interview, he confessed he felt completely out of control. As well he might. His patients' bodies were shutting down, some more rapidly than others. Ryan was rushed to Northwick Park's intensive care unit, where off-duty consultant Dr. Ganesh Sundharalingam had been called in by panicked colleagues. He was really as unwell as anyone I'd ever seen, he said. For a while, the men's symptoms, organ failure and plummeting blood pressure, looked like a classic cytokine storm. But they also mimicked signs of severe infection. The difference mattered. One demanded steroids, the other antibiotics, and a wrong decision could be fatal. There was really no margin for error, Dr. Sundharalingam admits today. It was a big decision to take, but it was one we had to get on with. We made a decision we would treat them as cytokine storms, and that meant administering a significant dose of steroids. After that, all anyone could do was wait and pray. What they were experiencing was a cytokine storm. TGN 1412 had triggered their immune systems to launch an all-out assault, not on disease, but on their own tissues. Organs began to fail, blood vessels leaked, their heads and torsos ballooned grotesquely. It was as if their immune systems hit the panic button and turned on their own bodies with lethal force. Staff scrambled in panic. By the afternoon, all 6 men had been rushed to intensive care, their bodies in critical failure. Monitors screamed, doctors raced to stabilise failing systems. Some of the men drifted in and out of consciousness, others were fully sedated, trapped in silence as their bodies unravelled. By nightfall, every life was hanging by a thread. Families had been called, and goodbyes were being prepared. David's fiancée Katrina's telephone call came at 3:30 a.m, after which she raced to the hospital to see her critically ill partner. I don't think anything could prepare you for what you saw when you first went in, she says now. It was pretty scary to see somebody you love so disfigured. Mohammed Abdelhadi's fiancée, Mafanwi Marshall, later said he looked like the Elephant Man, a description so shocking it quickly reached the press. Journalists swarmed the hospital, desperate for photos, sound bites and headlines. As the 6 men fought for their lives inside, reporters jostled outside, battling for the best angle. Cameras and microphones crowded the scene, turning the hospital entrance into a media frenzy. Meanwhile, police were notified and arrived swiftly on the scene. Given the severity of the reactions, the clinical trial unit was immediately declared a potential crime scene. Investigators couldn't rule out the possibility of sabotage. All remaining samples of the trial drug were secured and sent for urgent analysis. But within hours, it was confirmed the vials contained exactly what they were supposed to, TGN 1412, at the correct dosage. No tampering, no contamination. The disaster had come not from foul play, but from the drug itself. While police investigators declared the unit a crime scene, the 6 men continued to fight for their lives. 4 of the patients in intensive care who were awake suddenly declared that they felt much better within an hour of each other, although it would be another 5 days before Rob and David were moved out of intensive care onto a regular NHS ward, and another 2 weeks before they left hospital. Even then, they were shockingly weak, their immune systems depleted. David said, "I felt like an 80-year-old. My muscles were wasted away. We had no immune system at all. We were given instructions not to go on the tube, trains, or buses in case someone was to cough near us. It was an extremely traumatic time for them all." 20-year-old Ryan Wilson suffered the most devastating injuries. He remained in hospital for over 4 months. His immune system had gone into such a violent overdrive that his extremities lost circulation entirely. His fingers and toes turned black with necrosis, dead tissue, forcing doctors to amputate multiple digits in the days that followed. Rob Oldfield later recalled the terrifying hallucinations that overtook him, the sensation of dying while still fully aware. Now, these weren't sick or elderly patients. They were young, fit men who had walked into the hospital full of confidence. The physical trauma was immediate, but the psychological wounds ran even deeper. Several of the volunteers were later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, haunted by flashbacks and medical anxiety. Some would come to distrust clinical medicine entirely. What began as an act of goodwill and curiosity had turned into a lifelong reckoning with their bodies, their trust, and the medical system they believed would protect them. How could this have happened? The answer lies in the failure of animal testing to replicate what would happen in humans. The drug was administered 10 times more quickly into the men's bloodstream than it had been in monkeys, and the T cells that TGN-1412 targeted behaved differently in people. The human immune system was far more aggressive, and there was no preclinical data that predicted such a storm. Compounding this, all 6 participants were dosed before any effects could be observed in the first, a design flaw that regulators would later condemn. In the weeks that followed, media around the world reported the story with a mix of horror and disbelief. The drug company, Tejanero, collapsed within months. No doctors were prosecuted, but the men received compensation. Ryan Wilson was awarded over £2 million. The rest received hundreds of thousands. The MHRA overhauled its rules. Now, new biologic drugs must follow staggered dosing, lower initial quantities, and better preclinical models, including human cell cultures, before ever being tested in living volunteers. These new recommendations apply throughout Europe. It means, according to David Webb, Professor of Clinical Pharmacology at the University of Edinburgh, that clinical trials are safer than they ever have been. As for TGN-1412, the name has been quietly buried. The drug was rebranded, reformulated and tested again years later under strict new safety protocols. But the original trial stands as a brutal reminder. Preclinical success does not guarantee safety. The system, for all its layers, missed something critical, and human lives were nearly lost. Drug trials are essential. Without them, we have no antibiotics, no vaccines, no cancer treatments. But Northwick Park exposed just how thin the margin can be between medical progress and human tragedy. 6 men stepped forward in the name of progress, trusting science and trusting the system. They thought they were helping medicine move forward, maybe even saving lives. Instead, they were misled, unprotected, and nearly sacrificed in a catastrophe no one anticipated. Though all survived, none walked away whole. Some carry the scars on their bodies, others in their minds. Their ordeal became a turning point in clinical research. Today, every high-risk trial is shaped by the hard, painful lessons learned from that single day. But while the protocols have evolved, the cost of getting it wrong is etched permanently into these men's bodies. A reminder that scientific failure isn't theoretical. It's human, it bleeds, and it remembers. Despite his ordeal, Rob says, "I'm glad to have been part of something that has reformed the whole industry." Now, the material in this video was quite disturbing, I'll grant you, but I hope you did enjoy the way it was portrayed. I'll see you on the next one, and I'll say goodbye for now.